typically the place I live to start these conversations is what's top of mind for most people is around entity structuring and protection. I think it's an appropriate place to start in the discussion of asset protection, mainly because lawsuits are the one thing that can have a reset button in your life. So you can work your entire life and all of this time that you're putting into it, and a single person can come in and take it all from you. And so we'll be talking first a little bit about that. Then we'll be talking about estate planning, and I'll share with you guys a little bit about tax. And if time permits, I'd also be happy to share with you about what are the ways that my portfolio has expanded beyond real estate to help it accelerate and other areas that have been important for me and allowed me to do much more substantial charitable giving at this point. So in asset protection, I'll just switch my camera here and I'll start to draw this out for everyone. So you guys can all see my hand right here, right? And so the first thing that we want to talk about is, what is the absolute fundamental basics? And the first question on asset protection is do you need it? Right? Why would you ever spend money on something you don't need? So the question is do you need it depends upon each person. And the best answer to that question whenever it's asked of me is, would you cry if somebody took it from you? Because if you wouldn't cry if somebody took it from you, then it doesn't matter to you. And typically for most people, that's around $50,000. If they lost $50,000, they'd say, man, that's really going to hurt. And so I say, great. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do first is create something that we call an asset holding company. This asset holding company now turns into your lockbox. It's your safe. And so you should no longer own assets. If Bobby or Eric or Jason get into a car accident and somebody says, well, I'm going to sue you, they could say, hey, good luck, because you're not going to be, I don't have anything that you can take. And I'm wondering, Bobby, is there a way to be able to make it where you, I think it's called spotlighting me, where I take up the whole screen for people so they see it outside of like a panel view? It might be a little small for everybody in this panel style. It's probably in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom presentation.
Let me see. I know that, folks, you can actually click.
I think I just did it. Yeah.
Yep, you did it. Jason's got it. Jason is the man, always coming in to be able to save the day. Yeah. Thank you, Jason.
Jason's a superhero.
So this thing called an asset holding company, this is where it holds all of your assets, all of your extra cash. You personally don't own anything anymore. Apart from an asset holding company that protects all of your money, that owns everything and doesn't do anything, what I also recommend for everybody is to have something here that's called an operating company. This operating company is something that does everything, but it'll own nothing. So this is where you sign all of your leases, your contracts, hire contractors, send all of your email communications, etc. Now, with this asset holding company, for the 1 to 4 unit space, what I like to use is something called a Series LLC. Because what a Series LLC allows me to do is to create these things that are called child series. For this one, I'm just going to call it Child Series A. What's really neat about the Series LLC is that these are free to create, and you can create as many of them as you want to, and they function just like LLCs for liability protection. So let's say that you have, an asset here, and I think we had somebody in here that was doing some fix and flip work, yeah? So let me tell you about a client of mine who got sued about that was doing some fix and flip. So what happened in her case is that she was making communications to the buyer through an email account owned by her operating company. That just means it had a signature block there that said, hey, it's this client's name, I'm manager of this LLC. And then what happened is that in the email chain, there was a discussion about what plumbing in the house had been redone. turns out that a little while after the sale of the property, there was a leak in some of the plumbing in this property that she sold, and that caused $75,000 in damages because the buyer was actually on vacation. So do you think the buyer came back and was like, oh, well, that's just fine? No. They wanted to blame somebody for what happened. And this is actually the nature of what most lawsuits come about, is because something bad happens and they want to blame somebody else, and likely they will blame you. So the email chain's a little unclear about what plumbing in the house had been replaced, claimed to be replaced. And so the plaintiff's attorney ended up sending us a letter saying, hey, we're going to sue you guys for this plumbing issue and $75,000 in damages. And my response to him was like, well, you're going to have a problem with this lawsuit, because you can either sue this operating company that sent the communications to you, and if they send those communications to you and you want to sue on that, that's great, but this operating company doesn't own any assets, so there's nothing here for you to collect against. And my client also used a Series LLC, or in California, what we would use is something that's called a DST, or a Delaware Statutory Trust, which does exactly the same thing, except it's a trust structure, so you avoid franchise taxes. And you can also say, like, well, I'm going to sue this entity which actually sold me the property. But the problem is that this entity, this child series, it no longer owns this asset because it was sold and all of the cash was distributed out of the child series. So the net effect of that was you can either sue this company or you can sue this company, but neither one of them have any assets. And wouldn't you know it, that the lawsuit got dropped. And it got dropped not because of, what they thought about the emails and whatnot that could go there. It merely got dropped because the business decision of the lawsuit didn't make any sense anymore. Because no matter, even if they won the lawsuit, they wouldn't be able to get to any money. And this is one of the ways in which you can defeat lawsuits before they even start, is simply by being strategic and preemptive about setting in the right protection structure to ensure that there's nothing there for them to get. So this is very, very powerful. Now, a second avenue that becomes important for many of us, especially as we accumulate more wealth, is this other thing called anonymity. This first here, these child series, they give us something that I like to call compartmentalization. Compartmentalization means it's how we're going to isolate liability. So in this case, let's say that we have, I'm going to leave this as an empty box for right now. But let's take this second example on compartmentalization. And we say, well, what if there's no sale of the asset? But let's say on this property, this rental property, for example, grandma falls through the staircase and becomes permanently injured. In that case, grandma first sues, and hopefully the insurance company will then pick up the tab, right? And this is why we want to have insurance in place. It's our best first line of defense for whatever's coming up. But especially when claims get expensive, the business decision of the insurance company is actually to deny coverage. And when they deny coverage, the only thing that's left to protect you is your asset holding company. If you own all of your assets in your personal name and they deny coverage, then what you're left with is somebody being able to sue you and be able to potentially take everything that you own, because it's all in one bucket in your personal name. However, in this scenario, if grandma sues and the insurance company denies coverage, the most her recovery can be is this one asset and the equity that you have in this one asset. So that means all the other assets you might have and all the subsequent compartmentalized structures are all protected. So this is the way in which that you can say, great, if I lose one asset, does that suck? Of course. but it's much different than saying I'm now at risk for losing everything that I own, and having to reset, and what's that going to mean for my family, etc. Now, for many people that are in this 1 to 4 unit space, a key consideration that comes up for us is about financing and acquisition of these assets. So typically what we want to be doing is getting something that we call like personal financing. You might also hear this termed out to be like a conforming loan. And that's where you're going to be able to get your absolute cheapest rates for financing purposes. The problem with personal finances and conforming loans is they have to be made inside of your personal name. It's not a problem underneath this structure, because what we'll do is we'll use something that's called a land trust. So with a land trust, we get to be able to buy the asset inside of the personal name, and then we'll transfer it in a way that looks like a sale into the land trust. And this transfer won't violate the due on sale clause of the mortgage. So we're able to essentially get the best financing and move it underneath this structure so it's compartmentalized, while being able to get this best rates. The other great thing that's about a land trust is that a land trust obscures the ownership of the asset. This land trust will be called something like the 123 Main Street Trust, because it owns the asset that's located at 123 Main Street. Anything that's listed in connection with this land trust should always be an attorney and a law firm address. And this is the way that you're able to then own this piece of property, and everything to the public records that regards ownership points back to anonymous people that are then protected for anonymity purposes because of the attorney-client privilege. So people can't even ask about, and the law firm or the attorney can't tell anybody anything that's about this trust. Anonymity becomes important because the more that you can make it difficult for the business of the lawsuit to make any sense, the less likely you are to get sued. So lawsuits and the business of lawsuits work in such a way that it actually is the dollars of your claim, it's times your probability of winning, and that equals the amount that you're going to win, or your settlement amount. That's the simple formula that says this is how lawsuits will work. So, and when we can obscure the ownership of the assets to make it look like there's not much to come after, then what it looks like is that there's not much for them to get, even if they win the lawsuit. Similarly, the compartmentalization of the asset, you can see, also does the same thing, right? It says even if they have a great claim and they think there's a high probability they're going to win, if things are held anonymously and obscured for ownership purposes, or that they're bucketized, both of those things will make it where there's not enough money at the end of the day for them to come after, to be able to say, this is a good lawsuit that we should go after. This is somebody that we should definitely sue. Notice that if you have all of your assets in your personal name or inside of like a single LLC or a single trust where things aren't compartmentalized, then all of a sudden the equation actually flips to say, hey, this person has a giant target on their back that says, yeah, we definitely want to sue them because we think that there's a lot of money we can go after if we win this lawsuit. Inside of the anonymity portion that we're talking about here that the land trust provides on the asset level, this Series LLC can either be formed in Wyoming where it's de facto anonymous, or what we can do is have this Series LLC also owned by another type of revocable grantor trust. And we call this an agent trust, simply because it obscures on the public record who is the actual owner of this Series LLC or whatever the LLC may be. And in this way, if somebody says, well, I want to see what companies Bobby owns, they would search the Secretary of State records. Bobby's name doesn't appear in conjunction with any company ownership, because every company that Bobby actually controls is actually owned by this trust, anything tied to that trust or that company is then also just referred to the attorney and the law firm address, just like this land trust at the bottom. And both of these trusts are revocable grantor trusts that are passed through for tax purposes. They're essentially free to create and they cost you nothing to maintain. So anonymity is a great defense to be able to help protect you from lawsuits. That is a very inexpensive mechanism to do that. Outside of that, what you want to be looking for is compartmentalization of each of the assets. And what you would want to do for your operating purposes is operate everything through your operating company. So that way, if say, well, what if Bobby, they decide to sue Bobby personally? Well, all of Bobby's assets are protected here. But they, in this case, if everything happens through the operating company, they can't legitimately maintain a lawsuit against Bobby. And why is that important? It's because Bobby has something called a credit score that he needs for financing purposes. So the credit score itself is an asset. So the operating company protects you personally from the lawsuit, which in turn protects your credit score that you need to get the financing to get the more properties that come into place. So I'll pause right there because we just went over quite a few pieces and see, is there any questions that Bobby or Jason or Eric do you think would be important to cover off on before we go on to tax or estate planning?
Yes, Scott, there's quite a few questions that came in on chat. I'm gonna see if I can pick a couple from my buddy Evgeny. Is it important where you create the LLC? As far as I know, not all states support Series LLC. Keep in mind, Scott, that most of the folks are in California, but they own real estate in California, but also in other states.
Yeah. So where you form an LLC is important. You want to form an LLC for inside of your asset holding company and a state that has what's called charging order protection. And the best states for that are Delaware, Texas, Nevada, and Wyoming. Wyoming is de facto anonymous. Any other states are fine, except for you just have to use additional trust to be able to create the anonymity there. For California properties or somebody who's a California resident, or if you have California properties in other states, what I would recommend to use is what's called a Delaware Statutory Trust. And a Delaware Statutory Trust is actually a trust for franchise tax purposes, which is why you wouldn't want to use an LLC or a Series LLC in California. Because you would get taxed at $800 per year per entity, whether it's a child series or the parent Series LLC itself. The Delaware Statutory Trust, though, because it's a trust, it's not subject to the franchise taxes. It also allows you to create the individual child series, just like the Series LLC, and the rest of the system works exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
We got one more. Madeline is asking, I have a hard time finding insurance company that will insure a home that is titled to a land trust. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, so that's actually a common issue because it comes into the sophistication of like the agent or the company. So there is a little bit of hunting that has to happen to be able to get the insurance in place there. What's also possible is to acquire the asset in your personal name, get the insurance in your personal name, and then simply add the land trust to that existing policy as an additional insured. So that's another workaround.
Okay. Madeline, have you tried that? Maybe give that a shot. Let's see. Let me see. Okay, there's is umbrella insurance applicable if we use child series for all properties?
Yeah. So you still want to use your underlying liability insurance policies for our property and casualty insurance for all of your properties. What you'll do here, though, is actually just find out what is going to be the minimum insurance coverage you need to carry on that property. to be able to qualify for the umbrella policy. So the umbrella policy will have a minimum amount of underlying coverage, and they'll charge you a bunch of money to just give you, a small amount of coverage for that. And then typically for just in the realm of hundreds of dollars a year, you can buy millions of dollars of additional coverage on top of that with your umbrella insurance policy. Personally, I have the underlying policies, I have an umbrella policy, and I additionally use this type of asset holding company for all of my assets and investments.
Excellent, excellent. And looks like Evgeny's saying he's done this with farmers and he's had no problems. So, okay, good. All right, let's continue to the next. We'll come back to Q&A. Let's continue to the next section of our, your presentation.
Great. So now what we've done here, right, is we have our operating company, and this could be also additional businesses, right? These are just LLCs that are floating out here, yeah? And these LLCs take in cash. So the next piece that comes into is what do we need to do for estate planning? Because if you just have your LLCs like this and you die, then what happens is everything has to go through what's called probate court. And inside a probate court is where people and creditors and everybody comes out of the woodwork to try to take a piece of that estate. It's also where things can get challenged and the assets can get locked up inside of the court system because random people will want that money and will try to make some type of claim to either get that money or force into a settlement to get paid to go away. So the way that you're able to ensure that your family's protected, they get immediate access to all of the assets and all of the businesses and everything, is to take all of your companies and you tie them all together into something that's called a living trust. So the living trust is the mechanism by which you can avoid probate court. And inside of this trust document, which you can change at any time during your life, allows for when you die that there's a subsequent trustee who essentially administers whatever the rules of the trust are that says who gets what. And whoever gets what is all of your beneficiaries. The great part about the living trust too is that it's very easy to change. So that because through your life, you're going to learn more about your kids and your family, and you're going to say, well, how should certain people be provided for? Some people you'd say, hey, great, they're great getting all this money right away. Some people you'd say, hey, this would really be bad for somebody who, for certain people to get a bunch of money right away, right? And so you can create different rules around that about who gets how much money and when. A lot of times that's separated by ages, that certain kids will get certain amounts of money or distributions of the assets at certain times. You can also create certain bounties inside of the living trust in a way, right? Like if somebody gets married, they get X amount of money. If somebody goes to college or if they start a business, they can get additional money from your trust. So your living trust not only is that mechanism to avoid the probate court, but it's a way in which you're able to still be supportive from what your wisdom is for the people in your life, even after you're gone, to help guide them and support them in the right kind of way. Now, separate from your living trust, there's a second important document that's called a pour-over will. And what this pour-over will does is it says anything that we didn't put into underneath the living trust, then what we want you to do is to take all of those assets, pour them into the living trust, and just distribute it in whatever way the living trust says. So this is things like your clothes or your jewelry or just other things that might be you never thought to take the time to ensure that they're inside of your asset holding company or inside one of your other companies. Now, there's a number of other documents that are typically associated with a quality estate plan. This is typically called a durable power of attorney. You'll have something that's called a health care power of attorney. And these types of documents here are for the situation in which you become incapacitated, like you get into a bad ski accident or something like that, or a bad car wreck. You're no longer able to manage the finances, right? Or you're no longer able to make healthcare decisions for potentially just a period of time. and that these documents will allow somebody in your life to be able to help make limited decisions for you, like keep paying the insurance, keep paying the mortgages. These can be as broad or as narrow as you want them to be, depending upon your situation. But this would cover you 360, because it would say, hey, if I'm ever unavailable or incapacitated, these documents are going to step in to allow trusted people to come in to help take care of you and your affairs. And then these documents will help you in the event of death, to make sure that all of the assets go immediately to the heirs appropriately, and that everything in your life is scooped up and distributed in the way that your living trust designates that you want it to go.